The first speaker is Luana. Let me see if Luana is there. Yes. Luana Carvalho. She's from Brazil, where she concluded a master's in education at the Federal Fluminense University. She is a national leader of MST in Rio de Janeiro, that is the Brazilian Landless Rural Workers Movement, Movimentos Trabalhadores Rurais Sem Terra. It is a peasant social movement that emerged in 1984 in Brazil. The objective of MST is to carry out agrarian reform, practice ecological food production, and improve living conditions in the countryside. Luana, you now have 10 minutes to talk about your activities and your arguments for climate jobs.
Boa tarde a todos e todas companheiras. Me ouvem? Sim. Bom dia aqui no Brasil, né? Primeiro agradecer o convite pela participação nessa conferência, né? Agradecer em nome do MST. Agradecer a Leonora aí que fez o convite diretamente. Bom, tá bom falando assim, Leonor? Para tradução? Acho que sim. Tá, vou falar mais alto então. Quero, nesse tempo que me cabe, trazer um pouquinho sobre o MST, que é o Movimento dos Trabalhadores Rurais Sem Terra do Brasil, e quero trazer um pouco assim a nossa atuação no MST no último período, né? Então, começo a minha fala trazendo, né, que o MST é um dos maiores movimentos sociais do mundo, né? Quando surge lá na década de 80, mas importante frisar que o MST ele é fruto de muitas lutas que aconteceram aqui no Brasil, porque a questão agrária brasileira é uma questão que nunca foi resolvida de fato, né? E para nós a questão agrária brasileira ela é a raiz, né, dos problemas sociais que a gente tem no nosso país, da desigualdade social, da injustiça, da fome, da concentração da terra, né? Então, o MST, quando ele surge lá na década de 80, ele surge com 3 objetivos centrais, que é a luta pela terra, a luta pela reforma agrária e a luta pela transformação social, que são objetivos que até hoje permeiam a atuação do nosso movimento. Né? Como eu disse, lutar pela terra porque o Brasil é um dos países de maior concentração de terras do mundo. Os últimos dados do IBGE aqui no Brasil nos apontam que 46% das terras agricultáveis estão na mão de 1% da população. Então, é um índice de concentração de terra gigantesco. Quase metade do nosso território é de propriedade de apenas 1% da população brasileira. Então, fazer a luta pela terra, fazer a luta contra essa concentração, fazer a luta, né, na raiz aí, do capital, que é a luta contra a propriedade privada, contra a concentração da terra, e aí não só a concentração da terra, mas a concentração também dos meios e dos bens da natureza que cada vez mais, né, se coloca presente, né? Hoje, as discussões aqui no Brasil, a gente trabalha muito com a lógica, né, do agronegócio, como esse modelo de concentração da terra, mas também o hidronegócio, que é o que se reflete aí das águas, e o mineronegócio, que é também os nossos minerais aí, principalmente o minério de ferro, que está cada vez mais aí inserido nessa lógica do capital. Então, fazer essa luta pela terra. A partir da luta pela terra, a gente tem a nossa reforma agrária. E aí, pensar a reforma agrária é pensar nesse conjunto de políticas públicas que são necessárias para que a gente execute de fato a reforma agrária e a gente possa pensar em políticas de não só o acesso à terra, mas também as políticas de saúde, de educação, as políticas de infraestrutura, de saneamento básico, que a gente dê condições reais para que as pessoas, né, possam viver no campo e possam dali produzir a sua vida, produzir a sua existência, possam trabalhar, né, e possam de fato existir. Então, a reforma agrária é pensar nesse conjunto de políticas públicas necessárias, né, para a gente de fato mudar a lógica da concentração da terra. E o terceiro objetivo do MST, que é o objetivo da transformação social, porque é entender também que a questão da terra, a questão agrária no nosso país não pode ser só uma questão, né, das pessoas que vivem no campo ou dos movimentos sociais organizados que fazem a luta no campo. A questão agrária no nosso país é uma questão do conjunto da sociedade, porque lá no início eu disse, né, ela é raiz, né, dos problemas que nós enfrentamos hoje, principalmente da desigualdade social, mas também ela é a raiz do racismo, ela é a raiz, né, desse racismo estrutural que a gente tem, que a gente enfrenta ainda no Brasil nos dias de hoje. Então, fazer reforma agrária é um debate e é uma luta que tem que ter o conjunto da sociedade, o campo e a cidade. Então, para nós, sempre atuamos na perspectiva, né, de fazer relação e parceria com os companheiros da cidade, com as organizações, né, e movimentos sociais, e sindicatos e partidos, porque a gente entende que essa luta ela é conjunta e ela faz parte, né, de uma luta maior pela transformação da nossa sociedade. Então, esse é um pouco os objetivos do MST. Né? O MST, desde lá do seu nascimento, né, oficial, vamos dizer, que é a década de 80, ele tem, né, para além dessa preocupação, né, para além da luta pela terra, e a gente vivia nesse momento no nosso país, né, uma crise também, né, uma expropriação muito grande, né, dos camponeses, com a Revolução Verde que aconteceu na década de 70, né, muitos camponeses saem do campo para tentar a vida na cidade, então há um processo assim, intenso de conflitos sociais também e de contradições, né, que fazem com que o MST se organize de forma oficial aí a partir da década de 80, mas para além da ocupação da terra, da democratização do acesso à terra, o MST sempre teve também uma preocupação, né, com as questões ambientais, né, porque não basta ter só acesso à terra, mas o que a gente vai fazer com essa terra, como a gente constrói um modelo que seja diferente, esse modelo impregnado no campo. Então, a gente sempre teve essa preocupação, o próprio aprendizado e a cultura camponesa também sempre lidaram com a terra de uma outra forma. Porém, né, nessa última década, vamos dizer, que o MST vai enfrentar de forma mais direta esse debate e que a gente vai construir, então, em 2014, a gente lança, que é o nosso programa de reforma agrária popular. A partir de uma leitura de que essa reforma agrária clássica, que aconteceu muito na Europa, né, em vários países do mundo, assim, para nós, para o nosso país, ela não se executa mais e que era necessário pensar um outro modelo de reforma agrária, que tivesse na centralidade desse projeto, não só a democratização do acesso da terra, mas também que tivesse na centralidade esse debate ambiental, né? A construção de um outro modelo, de uma outra lógica de lidar com a natureza e com os bens naturais, que não seja essa lógica mercantilizada que o agronegócio e que o capital lidam hoje. Então, em 2014 a gente lança esse nosso projeto, que é o projeto da Reforma Agrária Popular, né, que vai ser baseado, né, como eu disse, tem a centralidade da democratização do acesso à terra, mas também que a gente vai pensar então na perspectiva da agroecologia, como esse modelo de produção que faz um contraponto real ao modelo do agronegócio, ao modelo hegemônico, né, que é do capital no campo. Então a gente vai trabalhar e a gente começa um processo de transformação nos nossos territórios já conquistados, né, de como é que a gente consegue esses processos, né, para fazer a nossa produção de base agroecológica, né, respeitando a natureza, respeitando os bens da natureza, entendendo que os bens da natureza são bens, né, são patrimônios da humanidade, então assim, não é nosso, não é propriedade, mas eles estão a serviço, né, do povo, não só o povo brasileiro, né, mas eles estão a serviço do mundo. Então a gente começa esse processo aí de trabalho também, né? A gente faz esse debate externo, né? De assumir de fato a agroecologia enquanto matriz de produção.
Desculpa, Luana, vou só pedir que termines em 2 minutos, pode ser?
Vou acelerar aqui. Então, a gente faz esse debate externo, mas também fazemos esse debate interno, então, de transformar as nossas áreas, né, de garantir esse processo de transição para esse modelo de agroecologia, entendendo como um modelo, né, como matriz de produção para a reforma agrária. E aí, assim, queria só dizer que, assim, nesse último período, então, né, o MST tem se dedicado, então, mais ainda a esse debate, né, e bom, todos vocês devem estar por dentro, né, de todas as atrocidades desse governo genocida que a gente tem hoje aqui governando o nosso país. E aí o MST, antes da pandemia, em 2019, a gente lança então o nosso Plano Nacional de Plantio de Árvores, que é plantio de árvores e a produção de alimentos saudáveis, né? Que é fazer justamente esse contraponto. A gente tem, nesses anos desse governo genocida, a gente tem aumentado o desmatamento, né? O desmatamento está recorde aqui, as queimadas, né? Batendo recordes aqui no nosso país, nunca antes visto o tamanho de desmatamento das queimadas. Então a gente constrói esse plano aí como esse contraponto a esse governo genocida, né, que a gente quer ao longo aí dos próximos 10 anos plantar 100 milhões de árvores nos nossos territórios, mas pensando sempre nessa perspectiva também da produção de alimentos, né, aliar o plantio das árvores, né, o reflorestamento, mas essa perspectiva também da produção de alimentos, de uma produção de alimentos saudável, que hoje é o grande, vamos dizer assim, é a grande bandeira que o MST carrega, né, e que nessa pandemia então ficou visivelmente, assim, para encerrar o MST na pandemia, a gente doou em torno de 7 mil toneladas de alimento, então assim, a gente se dedicou muito à produção de alimento e a fazer o debate dessa produção de alimento a um alimento saudável, a uma comida de verdade, sem agrotóxico, né, com relações justas de trabalho, para que possam chegar na mesa aí, principalmente das pessoas em situação mais vulnerável. E queria destacar também, né, que a partir desse processo, o MST hoje, ele é o maior produtor de arroz orgânico da América Latina, né? E essa produção aí também a gente fez muitas doações ao longo da pandemia, a gente pôde levar e ter acesso, né, a esse alimento que é tão básico e importante na mesa do brasileiro, que é o arroz, né? Todo brasileiro come a partir do arroz e a gente pôde levar esse alimento mais saudável à mesa de milhares de pessoas durante a pandemia. É isso, encerro por aqui.
Thank you very much. Luana, it's very interesting to, well, and also sad to hear about the very large challenges that you're facing in Brazil, where land is so concentrated, where people are being kicked off their land, both peasants and indigenous people, where food is considered a commodity by the large farmers and by the agribusinesses when it is actually obviously a common resource. And it's so good to hear that you are fighting this and managing to create a very large counter movement that does exactly the opposite. Food is a common resource. Food is a universal right. So congratulations and thank you for that. So we'll go to our next speaker, since I think Shiomi is missing. I will go directly to another Latin speaker, but from this continent, from Portugal, Pedro Horta. Welcome, Pedro. Pedro has been an activist for over 10 years in movements for a new rurality in southern Portugal. He collaborates with the Association Zero. It's a national environmental NGO on matters regarding agricultural policy at national and at EU level, and also the scrutiny of mega agro projects, mainly public investment in irrigation, heavy projects that expand irrigation area, and finally civic engagement initiatives. So Pedro, you have 10 plus 2 minutes. We are giving everybody an extra 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Hello, everyone. I'm not a native speaker of English, so if something is not clear, please do make me notice. I'd like to bring the aspect of public policy on shaping the global food systems. Of course, Europe as a bloc is one of the major shapers and beneficiaries of the global food system now, but it has made it so at the cost also of rural populations domestically. So the reforms, we could go back further on, but I think for the sake of time, we can focus on the reforms of post-World War II in Europe. That's basically from the Marshall Plan onwards, created a new framework for agricultural organization and production. Also in relation to maintaining the colonial type relationships with the ex-colonies of European countries. But what that meant in practice was a reshaping of the rural areas and a heavy loss of people in those areas, and also an industrialization of agriculture. Was of course the Green Revolution also happened here in Europe, and it is an ongoing process as well, mainly impactful on the southern countries of Europe, now integrated in the EU. So in between 1960 and 2010, people living in the rural areas were 41% of the population of Europe in 1960, and right now it's about 25%. It's a big loss. In terms of farmers, was even bigger. We lost in the continent about half of the farmers that were existing, and about 7% of the farms own about 70% of the land. And if we look directly into the reforms made until this day, they kept some measures that are the same from 1962 onwards. I'm talking about the Common Agricultural Policy now. Basically, we kept a support for specialization of several regions, a support for increasing the farm structure, adhering to the logic of economies of scale and industrialization of production. And we also converted basically our old distribution of food through big retailers. So it's an alien concept for most citizens in the EU thinking about food sovereignty on a regional level, because basically all food goes through the intermediaries of the big retailers. At first, the policy promoted some protectionism to help develop food production in the post-war years and to stabilize the markets internally. And then the subsidization of food, heavy subsidization of food, also promoted the export of food, a cheap food for other countries, which would compete directly in those countries. Just to have an idea, even now that we are reforming the CAP, still most of the support goes to a very small fraction of the beneficiaries, and the beneficiaries are also a small fraction of the farmers, because we still, in some countries, we still have what we call historical rights, which means that some producers from one point onwards were selected to be beneficiaries, and they are still historical beneficiaries, despite other farmers are coming forward. And there's a large asymmetry in the allocation of the funds. So about 20% of the beneficiaries, they aggregate 80% of the funds, mostly because support is linked to area. So the bigger the area, the bigger the support. And when it's linked to production, there's also a relationship between area and production. So mostly the beneficiaries are the same, mostly a small group. Right now, we are filling in the southern countries of Europe a new vague of intensification through irrigation projects, and Portugal is no different. Which seems like a contradiction in regions that are lacking water. So much investment in concentrating water in one area and benefiting a small percentage of farmers with big land, and to convert completely the farmers' agricultural systems to industrial monoculture production. Basically to integrate global markets as commodities without any strategy to supply regionally. And this is happening with new forms of slavery as well, with deals made with countries which are stricken by poverty or conflict, and these new rural workers are then moved into these European countries to be exploited further, without so much an interest by the states to really create an opportunity here. It's basically the continuation of the same forms of exploitation that we saw before in some regions, specifically here in Alentejo, is the shifting from exploiting local populations to now exploiting even more fragile populations from other origins. But despite all this, and despite not recognizing in terms of policy the importance of small farmers, during the COVID shutdowns, it was very apparent that the availability of food still was in part supplied by small farms. There were some interesting studies that revealed that in some regions, about 30% of the food available was supplied by small farms directly. So there's a network of small farmers that normally have other activities, but also produce for themselves, for their neighbors, that create resilience in those systems, even here in Europe, where the consumption and production model is very much structured in a way of distancing people from production and from producers. In terms of the impact on climate change, if we do the accounting, the official accounting provided by the orientations of the IPCC, it seems that there was a diminishing effect of emissions, greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture in Europe. But what's hiding behind this is not accounting indirect effects from consumption and from this food system itself, and from transport and production of factors of production like pesticides and fertilizers. These aspects are externalized from the accounting, so it's very easy to say that there was a reduction when in fact we are causing emissions elsewhere that are not being accounted directly here. So I think that without an actual shifting in policy, either nationally or in these economic blocks, it's almost impossible to house different models of production. So Europe has about 4% of this active population. It's dedicated to food producing food. In Portugal, it's a little bit higher, but it's a very minority, a very small minority of people that have access to production, and also it's a profession that it's very devaluated.
2 minutes.
Yeah, I'll finish. It's very devaluated because of the intermediaries between production and consumption. So there's a big opportunity to create shorter supply chains, to create models of new rural living in places that are basically being squeezed out because of lack of economic opportunity. I think there's a lot to be done in that regard.
That's it.
Yeah,
You're still allowed 1.5 minutes.
I'll discount it on the debate.
Anyway, there will be debate, and
Yeah.
everybody will have a chance to add to whatever they have told us. So thank you very much, Pedro. Of course, sad to see that also in Europe we are not much better off than in Latin America. Maybe with the difference that so far it's more rare to see activists and small farmers and peasants get killed for protesting the large-scale investments, but we don't know how long that is going to last, because as we scale up our protest against hyper-intensive agricultural farming, we might also see more lashbacks. So far, you and me and other activists are relatively safe from harm, but we don't know how long this is lasting.
Europe is a beneficiary from exploitation elsewhere, so we are insulated from the worst aspects of this.
Yes, we are exporting a lot of our problems. We are importing migrant workers who, yes, those are suffering. They are exploited. They are the victim of human rights abuses, and this is growing. I studied the area of Odemira, and 25% of the people living there at the moment are migrant workers from India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and they are not living in great conditions. Some of them have to live in containers, others live 15 in a room, while they still have to pay 100 euros for their little place in the room with the other 14 people. So there's this whole new business model growing that lives off the services provided to exploited workers. It's extremely cynical. And
there's companies that are benefiting from renting houses and also from cheap labor in
Exactly.
farming. So
yeah, there's a whole parallel business which is highly unethical and which is benefiting here from the side effects of the needs of intensive farming. It's very nice of you to mention, as Luana also mentioned, the opportunities that exist in small-scale farming, if we could defend them better and channel investment to them, but also even if we don't, because they are in fact more resilient in the face of catastrophe, and they have already proved that. They are not they're not dependent or not so dependent on the external, the non-sustainable factors for production. They don't have these high energy and water needs. So in times of war, as we are living, in times of accelerated climate change, increasingly they will show to actually be the better choice. But of course, it would be we would all be happier if at the moment politicians would recognize this and already change the policy and divert subsidies towards them. But it was good to hear you, Pedro, and I'm sure in the debate we can hear a bit more. I will now move to the last speaker, which is Max Aal. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. Or Eel, Max Eel. Better?
It's fine. It's I accept all pronunciations.
Yes, I saw on a YouTube that somebody called you Max Eel, so I followed.
Yeah. It's no one should be accountable for it. It's very difficult.
It's probably Achal. Is it Achal?
It's Isle, but it's quite impossible to maintain a correct pronunciation. So
Okay.
it's no
Okay.
problem. Yeah.
So Max Aal is based in Tunisia. He is a PhD from Cornell University in developing studies. He's a postdoctoral fellow at the Rural Sociology Group at Wageningen University, and he's an associated researcher at the Tunisian Observatory for Food Sovereignty and the Environment. He's an associate editor at Agrarian South and the Journal of Labor and Society. He has also written for the Journal of Peasant Studies, the Review of African Political Economy, The Viewpoint magazine, and others. His most recent book, called A People's Green New Deal, is from 2021, and this will be, I think, the topic of his presentation. So Max, you have 10 minutes plus 2, and I will warn you after 10 minutes. The
Great.
floor is yours.
Great. Thank you for the invitation, and Luana and Pedro, thank you so much for your presentations, and thank you to the organizers for your work. So I'm going to discuss a little bit about climate jobs within a global perspective. And as a kind of preliminary note, I think it is very important for us who are concerned with restructuring of the global and local agrarian sectors on sustainable and egalitarian and democratic, and from my perspective, anti-capitalist lines, that there is a sense in which this idea of food farming and its ecological and specifically its climate impacts is already on the agenda, but in a way that we do not want it on the agenda, right? That there's a pre-existing attempt, which you can read if you read about the World Economic Forum, read about what is coming out from UNDP and so forth, right? That is articulating an agenda for natural climate solutions that is extremely reliant in some senses on a kind of depoliticized version of food-related or agriculture-related climate jobs or natural systems-based climate drawdown and so forth. Right now, I'm not going to go fully into that now, although I'd be happy to address it more in the Q&A. But what I think is it's very important to keep that in mind, that is one, they are stealing a march, you can say, on large sectors of Western progressive movements or leftist movements, and even Southern progressive movements sometimes, who are very disinterested in agriculture, right? And so it's already being actively recuperated and kind of instrumentalized in favor of an agenda that is hierarchical and in favor of monopoly capital by monopoly capital, right? So ideally, we want an agenda, a people-centered agenda that fights against that, is aware of it, fights against it, and also looks in a holistic way about what kind of transformation we need that protects these types of, that protects this type of labor, protects this type of work, that protects the environment, and that a transition to which this type of labor investment can contribute. So I would say that we can imagine kind of three broad progressive approaches, right? We can imagine an approach that really focuses a bit narrowly or specifically on jobs in the agricultural sector. We can likewise take an approach that focuses on agriculture and jobs therein as within the broader ambit of land management, because agriculture is ultimately, in a certain sense, it's about food provisioning and it's about land management, right? It's like an organic membrane. And then we can focus on land management and agriculture within a system of polarized accumulation. This is what we're talking about in the different places of northern jobs and southern jobs, the more brutal systems of exploitation, direct political persecution that are faced by people in the southern agrarian sector and so forth, right? And so this is why it's important for us to be aware of the interconnections and the way the northern action is also constituting and constituted by what's going on in the south of the world system, right? The periphery core south. I think it's more or less understood that the northern agricultural system, right, by the people in this conference, the northern agricultural system, right, is a disaster. I mean, the agricultural system on the whole produces 23 to 37% of current emissions. It has a massive ecological impact. It's actually a primary driver of the biodiversity crisis with the dumping all the poisons into the ecosystem. It actually is not fit for feeding human beings decent food. It has massive impacts on health because of the types of foods that are consumed. Then it also has massive north-south aspects, right? I mean, there is a process of commodity export from the south. Things that cannot be grown in the north are grown in the south. All the spices, coffee, tropical fruits, palm oil. This is all grown in the south, right? There's also relies on structural unemployment in the south, right? Because you have to take people off southern land in order to grow something that they don't want to grow them to eat themselves there. And then you also take people off the land in order to suppress wages there. And then you have the northern import of southern workers, right, from destroyed agrarian sectors in the south. So this keeps in mind, this is a globally constituted system, right? And then the last aspect, which is often the most difficult, I find, to get on the agenda in a lot of progressive spaces, is that this whole system, right, is not like a self-regulating system, right? It's not like it's just this self-regulating gear shift machine that just runs by itself. No, it's a political system, right? It's politically protected, it's politically defended. So it's not only politically defended by, for example, the violence carried out against peasant activists in Brazil and all the assassinations that occur in Western Venezuela. It's also that really put a halt essentially to the agrarian reform in Western Venezuela, right? It's also reliant on northern attacks against the entire political sovereignty of southern nations, which makes it, or changing who governs them, and that in turn has internal ecological and social aspects. I mean, very much on the agenda in Brazil. Deforestation, I think, accelerated by 800% with the installation of Bolsonaro, and the U.S. greenlit the judicial coup, right? We know this very well. It's very well established, right? So about thinking about the fact that the climate jobs that we want, the green agricultural climate jobs we want, are also interlaced with this kind of very complicated question of imperialism and neocolonialism as it flows from north to south, not merely on the economic plane, right, in terms of what we import in terms of labor, in terms of what we import in terms of food, but also in terms of what we export in terms of direct violence that then allows the South to be constructed a certain way. So in terms of what kind of reconstitution, I mean, I think there's certain aspects. I mean, I think the previous speakers have elaborated on this in certain ways that I don't really want to, I don't have that much to add to, but what I think is so essential and is also not so much on the agenda is that if we want to support Northern agrarian justice movements, right? We also want to change the agrarian structure in the North. Actually, we need Northern agrarian reforms, right? Agrarian reform has to be on the agenda, not only in the South, where it's an absolute necessity for popular development, and almost every country in the South is facing an agrarian question of land and needing agrarian reform. You also need it in the North, right? The North land is becoming a major investment asset. Land is extremely highly concentrated. I think there's a great new book about it as it's occurring in England. I mean, the extent of land concentration is now headline news all the time in the United States with Bill Gates and an older generation, Ted Turner, right? Land is a major sector of monopoly capital concentration. If you want basically a self-subsistent, just ecologically renewable system where there's kind of popular self-directed management of agrarian jobs, both in a green transition and towards a better green world system, then the most basic thing is you need to change the property relations in the countryside so that people can apply labor and get just rewards for their labor, right? And then there's a lot of other things that are also extremely important on the macroeconomic level, which we need to think about as well, which need to enter into our conversation, right? You need parity prices that are basically equivalent of a fair wage for people doing the agrarian production, right? Agrarian production is now devalued and basically people suffer from it. In the US, there's an epidemic of farmer suicides. This isn't because people don't like going in the dirt. I mean, in fact, most Americans in particular love going to their gardens and playing in the dirt, right? This is actually a socially and politically constituted devaluation of a specific kind of labor, which was devalued for a specific purpose in order basically to replace capital, replace labor with capital in the countryside and basically carry out, in a sense, the first green revolution, you can think of it that way, which was in the United States itself, right? The first major installation of systematic betting on the strong, replacement of a labor system with a capital-based system to the great benefit of monopoly capital. You have to break up the monopoly capital corporation. You have to break up Archer Daniels Midland. The people who are profiting, you know, it's not like cereal production costs are so crazy. It's not like there's such a supply shock. There's major money being made in terms of the extraction through speculation on cereal commodities currently right now. That has to stop, right? These should be, there should be publicly or internationally planned boards for the engineering, the price engineering of commodity prices, both internally within nation states and also on an international level. So we don't have world food crises, right? So that food is not a commodity, because if food is a commodity, then you're gonna end up destroying the land and you're gonna end up destroying labor. There's no way around it. You have to remove food from the commodity circuit. And there's a lot of struggles going on to do that. The struggles are being discussed. There's struggles going on in Portugal. There's struggles going on across Europe. There's struggles going on in the United States. There's very vibrant struggles going on across the global South, from Brazil to the most important agrarian reform of the post-Cold War era, which was in Zimbabwe, right? Our land, it's taken from white settlers and giving it to poor Black people, right? All of these are very important. They have to be actively supported, right? With political support. And this is how these are the types of jobs that can draw down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, that can carry out ecologically restorative action. And this is the type of thing that can be done that are the kind of nuts and bolts of a transition to more non-hierarchical, egalitarian, and permanently sustainable world system. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Max. You're very well trained, because you managed to give us a very well constructed story, and all within 10 minutes. That's brilliant. Thank you. And what I liked is that you gave us a global perspective. So we looked a bit at Latin America, we looked a bit at southern countries in Europe and the struggles they're going through. And you gave it a global perspective, which is crucial, because indeed, as you so rightfully say, the way we export and import in the North impacts everything that happens in the South. So we are both importing and exporting violence, and inequality, and gender inequality, and other problems. We are also helping to cause land contention, because there's a lot of northern countries that are buying up. China is one of them. They're buying up land in well, even in Southern Europe, but also in Africa and South America. So as you point out, land is one of the big battlegrounds that we are having. Luana also spoke about it. Pedro also spoke about it. The way we use land and whom we allow to snatch up the land, this is going to define our future. Because if we lose our land and it's all in the hands of big companies that have their own agenda and usually mostly look for cash crops and not so much look to provide a full nutrient-rich diet to everybody, yeah, then we could see some serious struggles going to happen, because in Portugal, small farmers are indeed either abandoning their land or taken off their land because they can't afford it or because they were just renting it. And then they can't go back. You can't go back. It's well, you can go back if there's a political will and decision to do that, which is completely lacking at the moment. And as you also pointed out, very interestingly, this is not a left-right political division in terms of how we view agriculture, because left parties are just as the right wing parties in favor of industrialized farming. And they are not seeing the actual problems. They might be worried, well, yeah, let's have some fair wages for farmers and workers, but they're not really seeing the problem of industrializing the entire world with hyper-intensive farming. We have a socialist government in Portugal, and it is with this government that we have seen the most acceleration of hyper-intensive farming. It's unheard of. It's shocking. It's at a rate of 1 month you drive through a countryside and it still looks more or less bucolic, so to speak. A month later you drive by and it all looks like cemeteries of these tiny little trees planted very close together, fruit or olive or almond, that will become 1,000 hectares of just one crop. So that is really shocking. We are both implanting it on our continent, in this case Europe, and we are also exporting and importing this model. So I thank all the speakers. It was great to hear the different perspectives, ideas, and I think we covered most of the problems. It would be great now if both the people that listen to us and the speakers came up with some contentious ideas that we could discuss for the half an hour that we have left in this session.